Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. New York had never seemed so cruel as that night. The rain fell in tight curtains, beating against the sidewalks and turning the streets into narrow rivers. The neon lights of the skyscrapers cast shimmering reflections on the wet asphalt. In this luminous chaos, a figure slipped between the puddles, Clara Johnson, a 32-year-old homeless woman, dressed in layers of worn clothes, her wet hair plastered to her face. She had learned to disappear into the crowd, to become invisible, but tonight, hunger and cold had made her bold. Her sharp, wary eyes fell upon a hurried, elegant man stepping out of a black limousine parked in front of a building with illuminated windows. The man, William Prescott, 39 years old, impeccably dressed in a suit, had a hurried, distant look about him. In his haste, he placed his state-of-the-art phone on the hood of the car, just long enough to open the door. Clara, as if instinctively guided by chance and despair, reached out and grabbed it. Her heart was pounding. She had never stolen anything, but this phone represented a chance, a ticket to a few days of survival. The world seemed to hold its breath. Clara was already disappearing into the dark alleyways, vanishing into the storm like a shadow, while William noticed nothing. This phone, however, was not just an object. It was a digital vault, contracts, evidence, trade secrets, private contacts. A key to a world Clara couldn't even imagine. And she, without realizing it, had just stepped into a universe where every action could have dramatic consequences. Soaked to the bone, her heart pounding, she sought refuge in a night shelter, clutching the phone like a treasure stolen from a life she had never known. At that moment, neither William nor Clara suspected that this theft would trigger a series of events that would shatter their lives, exposing them to the truth, to justice, and to an encounter that would change everything. The next morning, William Prescott stood in his luxurious penthouse in the heart of Manhattan, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand. The city below was already bustling, honking taxis, distant sirens, hurried passers-by. But William heard nothing. His eyes were glued to the television screen. CNN was broadcasting a report on the city's homeless, a poignant and humane segment. A young woman appeared on the screen. Her hair still damp, her eyes tired but determined, she spoke with brutal authenticity. She recounted the hunger, the cold, the loneliness, and how the rich and the system ignored them. William felt an icy shock in his chest. The voice, the face, it was her. Clara Johnson. The same young woman who, the day before, had stolen his phone in the rain. He froze. Every word she uttered resonated like a silent accusation. It wasn't simply a material theft, it was a brutal reminder of his own ignorance, of his isolation in a world where money masked the truth. William felt a strange mixture of anger and admiration. How had she survived alone in the storm, with a dignity he could never have imagined? And above all, how had she dared, unknowingly, to expose him to a reality he had always ignored? He grabbed his phone, checking the files, the messages, the photos. Everything seemed intact, and yet, he knew that a simple object could become the catalyst for uncontrollable events. For the first time in years, business tycoon William Prescott felt vulnerable. And for the first time, he understood that the stolen phone wasn't a threat, but a gateway to a world he needed to understand. An assistant knocked on the door, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Prescott, you have a meeting in 10 minutes. William shook his head, his eyes still fixed on the screen. Business, contracts, and profit were no longer relevant. He had to find that young woman. He had to understand what she was seeing, and what her presence meant to him. For the first time, power and money were no longer enough. And somewhere, in a makeshift shelter, Clara was still unaware that her survival had just turned the life of one of the most powerful men in New York upside down. William Prescott sat in his glass-walled office overlooking Manhattan. The city was even brighter than usual in the morning sunlight, but to him, everything seemed dull, almost unreal. His phone lay silent on the desk in front of him. Clara Johnson. The young woman who had dared to steal his most prized possession, and who now haunted his thoughts. His assistants had launched a search, all leads pointed to shelters, to poor neighborhoods he had never taken the time to explore. But the more William learned about her, the more torn he felt. There were two options. Punish her for theft, remind everyone that the law and the power were on his side, send the police if necessary. After all, he owned everything, including a stolen phone by a homeless person might have seemed trivial to him. Trying to understand her, discovering who she was truly, that which had driven her to act, and perhaps learn something about this world he had always ignored. William ran his hands over his face. Anger and frustration boiled inside him. He saw the previous day again, the rain, the phone, that trembling figure fading into the darkness. And that face on television that morning, so brave, so real. He realized he was facing a truth no amount of wealth could erase. His life, despite his millions, had never intersected with that of society's invisible members. And this young woman, through a simple theft, had just opened his eyes. His worried assistants were waiting for a decision. "What do we do, sir?" asked one of them. William shook his head. "Don't hunt her down, not yet. I want to understand before I act." This unexpected choice shook him to his core. He knew Clara could represent a risk. She now held in her hands an object containing secrets from his professional life. But more than the risk, it was the possibility of transformation that attracted him, understanding, learning, perhaps changing. William stood up, staring at the skyline, his hands clasped tightly. He didn't yet know how to approach Clara, or how this encounter would unfold. But one thing was certain, he was no longer the same man. The storm that had struck New York the day before hadn't just soaked the streets, it had shaken his world. In her makeshift shelter, Clara was still unaware that her life was about to collide with that of one of the most powerful men in the city. And that this simple stolen phone would now become the starting point of a transformation she could never have imagined. The streets of New York buzzed with activity, but in the night shelter where Clara Johnson spent her days, the outside world seemed far away. She distributed blankets and soup to the homeless, always attentive to everyone's needs. Her stolen phone lay in her bag, full of messages and contacts she hadn't yet explored. At the entrance to the shelter, a different sound of footsteps echoed. Clara looked up and saw a man in a suit, his hair perfectly styled, his gaze intense. William Prescott. Her heart sank. How had he known where to find her? Was he seeking revenge? He greeted her in a measured tone. "Clara Johnson? I'm William Prescott. I think we need to talk." Clara took a step back, suspicious. "You're the guy whose phone I took yesterday," she said coldly. "Why are you here?" William took a deep breath, feeling that every word had to be carefully chosen. "I didn't come to punish you. Not yet. But I want to understand. Understand why you did this, and what you see in this world that I never look at." Clara narrowed her eyes. She didn't know whether to believe him. Every encounter with a wealthy person had so far meant humiliation or rejection. But something in his tone, in his presence, compelled her to listen. "You want to understand?" she asked skeptically. "Then sit down. And don't think I'm going to sugarcoat it. Here, the truth is harsh. People are dying outside. People like you, you don't see anything." William nodded, accepting the silent challenge. He sat down on a wooden bench, while Clara continued to distribute the blankets, her movements precise and full of compassion. The silence lasted a few minutes, each sizing the other up. Then Clara broke the ice. "You want to know what it's like to be invisible? Well, this is it. The cold, the hunger, the loneliness. You've always had everything, and I have almost nothing. And yet, I fight every day to survive." William felt a lump form in his throat. He had never encountered so much sincerity. His life of power and wealth had never intersected with such raw humanity. "And this phone," she said finally, "you dropped it." "I took it to survive. It didn't belong to me, but I had no choice." William looked at her in silence. He then understood that this encounter was not a simple confrontation, it was an opportunity. A chance to see the world as it truly was, through the eyes of those he had ignored. For the first time in a long time, he was neither the tycoon nor the master. He was simply a man, facing a woman who showed him the truth, without compromise. The streets of New York, as seen from William Prescott's limousine, were a sight he had never taken the time to observe. But today, he stepped out of the vehicle, accompanied by Clara. The rain and the cold did not impress him as much as the truth unfolding before his eyes. Clara guided him through alleyways and shelters, showing him faces marked by life, calloused hands reaching for hot soup, eyes that simply begged to be seen. William felt his luxurious world crumble with every step. The skyscrapers that dominated the city suddenly seemed out of reach, like hollow monuments next to this raw human reality. "Here," said Clara, handing a blanket to a man sitting against a wall, "every day is a struggle. Some people die alone in the streets. And you have everything. You could do so much to change this, but you stay in your glass and steel towers." William didn't reply. He felt his words would be useless. Every scene he saw, every story he was told, struck at his heart. He had lived under the illusion that money was enough, that power offered protection. But here, none of that mattered. Clara took him into a community center, where volunteers were distributing food and clothing. William watched silently as every gesture, even the smallest, had a real impact. He understood that this world, which he had long ignored, was filled with courage and dignity, despite the suffering. At the end of the day, as they walked back into a quieter alley, William finally broke the silence. "Clara. I've never seen anything like it in my life. I didn't know, not really." Clara looked at him, tired but determined. "Now you know. And now it's up to you to decide what you will do with what you know." William realized that the stolen phone, which he had initially considered a loss, was actually the key to his own unlocking. Clara had forced him to look beyond the walls of his building, beyond his wealth, and to confront a truth he had always refused to acknowledge. For the first time, William Prescott felt a genuine desire for change awaken within him. Not for image or profit, but for humanity. And Clara, through her strength and compassion, had become the unexpected guide to his transformation. A few weeks had passed since Clara Johnson and William Prescott met. The city continued its frenetic pace, but for them, nothing was the same anymore. Clara had reluctantly agreed to work with William, not for the money, but to give a voice to the homeless people she knew so well. In a large, glass-walled hall of the community center, William publicly announced an unprecedented project, a massive aid fund aimed at improving the living conditions of the homeless. Clara would be the face of the operation, its operational director. The media were there, cameras trained on them. Criticism was sure to pour in, some would accuse William of engaging in philanthropy for his reputation. But Clara, relentless and clear-sighted, knew that this visibility was a weapon she could use to protect the homeless and raise public awareness. "I'm not here to be admired," Clara said to the cameras, her voice firm but clear. "I'm here so that the invisible are seen, so that people understand that surviving on the streets is not a choice." William, standing beside her, felt an emotion he had never known before, pride mingled with profound respect. The stolen phone, which he had initially seen as an object of theft and betrayal, had become the catalyst for this change. It had opened the door to an unlikely encounter, to an awakening that would transform their lives and the lives of many others. After the conference, in the silence of his office, William thought back to that rainy night when it had all begun. He remembered Clara, soaked to the bone, clutching her phone, just trying to survive. And now, that same woman was leading a project capable of changing the destinies of hundreds of people. For Clara, life had also changed dramatically. She was no longer just an invisible survivor on the streets. She had become a powerful, respected voice, capable of influencing and protecting those who had never been heard. And in this unlikely alliance, between wealth and survival, between power and humanity, one thing was clear: sometimes, a simple act, a stolen phone, a gesture of courage, can change lives and create a fairer world. The rain was still falling outside, but this time it was no longer cold and cruel. It was washing over the city, as if to mark the beginning of a new era.